Hello and welcome to our webinar all about how to create award-winning branding. I'm Rosie Hilder, Deputy Editor of Creative Bloq and Editorial Director of the Brand Impact Awards. And welcome to our guest today. I'm joined by two judges from the Brand Impact Awards 2025. First of all, some introductions. Could you each tell us your name and where you work, starting with Kat?
Hello, lovely to see you again, Rosie. My name's Kat, Kat Howe. I'm co-founder and executive creative director of How and How, and I'm based out of Los Angeles, but most of the team are in London.
Lovely, thank you. What about you?
My name's Tommy Taylor, and I'm creative director at creative agency Alphabetical in London.
Brilliant, thank you so much. As I mentioned, both Kat and Tommy were judges for last year's Brand Impact Awards, the scheme that awards the best branding from around the world. We've asked them here today to discuss what makes brand identity stand out from the crowd. And to begin with, each judge will outline their favourite project from 2025's awards. We'll start with you, Kat. Please tell us about the project you've selected.
So I chose Take the Crown by RGA. It was an amazing, that's the one I chose. So I suppose a bit of context. I actually spoke to the chief design officer about this when I knew that I was going to be on this show, because I wanted to learn more about it, and I just love the project so much. I wanted to get a bit more info. But just to give you some context, following the defeat, I think in 2003 of the Voice referendum in Australia, which essentially aimed to give Indigenous Australians a stronger political voice. This was, a really, really big blow for them, and it didn't happen. So RGA launched Take the Crown, which was a really bold initiative, which was designed to reignite all the conversations around, this national dialogue around, their sense of place and colonial power and, public disengagement, all these different things. So they basically created a campaign, but also it was a largely brand project as well. And I suppose part of what I loved about it was that it was so holistic and was so powerful in so many different ways. So they got a graffiti artist to create this crown emblem, and there was music, dance, art, storytelling. There was public discussions and all this stuff, and a new We Are Warriors film, basically, which celebrated Black excellence over there. So, it was a great project. It had the crown symbol was amazing. It was a symbol with teeth. I felt like I remember writing notes about that. It wasn't decorative. It was really confrontational, and it was a mark born from rage, really reclaiming, the symbol of power, and flipping it on its head. So I thought that was a great icon. I thought it had instant impact. It was really, really, really powerful. They used a throne as a design statement as well in the piece. The object, I believe, said more than any poster really could as well. So they used to use these powerful objects, and it felt really raw and had real cultural intent, I think, as a project. The visual language was not polished, intentionally so, which I thought was really, really good. And it shows a sense of urgency, I think, over gloss, really, even though it was very well produced. So I think there was a real emotion. You could really sense the emotional temperature of the Indigenous communities and this sort of anger they had. I think I remember saying on some of my notes that the rage was palpable, and you really sense that in the work, which I think was really important. So it's also multi-sensory, multi-craft. There was, like I said before, music, film, typography, spoken word. So every discipline, I believe, all centered around this one idea, which was really important as well. And that was about elevating Black excellence, raising Indigenous boys and girls to start to believe in themselves, and almost dismantling this colonial lens that the whole project was really, really about. So great design system, really well held together, never dulled its edge. And just some other stuff I learned about the flag and how they'd actually when they started to try and use the Aboriginal flag in some earlier work, I think there was a copyright problem around it, where even the Indigenous people themselves couldn't use it. And the Aboriginal flag marks a really safe space for the people. But because of this, RGA actually quite cleverly, I think, and ingeniously freed the sun from the flag, and then used it as a spotlight for the stories instead. So I thought that repurposing of a problem, or that solving of a problem, but making it into something more powerful was really, really was really, really good. And then, of course, there's loads of other things on the campaign side that I think worked really well from an emotional level. But I don't know if I've gone on too much already about that.
No, that's perfect. Thank you so much. We should also say that project won the Social Impact Award at the Brand Impact Awards last year. Okay, so we'll move on to Tommy. What about you? What was your favourite project from last year's awards?
Yeah, so it's interesting that Kat mentioned that one, because that was one of my favourites as well. I thought that was such a good project for so many reasons, most of which you've outlined already. And also just to note that RGA just seemed to have a stellar year this year. There's so many projects they had in that were finalists, which were just incredible. But actually, I know you want us to talk about different ones. So the one I've picked is Centre Square by Jones Knowles Ritchie. Again, another stellar year for those guys. And they're just doing some brilliant work. It's really inspiring, I think. So Centre Square, in case anyone hasn't seen it or doesn't know, they're basically the largest data center in the US. And they specialize in co-location and data services. But ultimately, it's quite, even the way I explain it, it sounds like a very unsexy thing to do. It's a very uncharismatic industry. But what they've managed to do so successfully, I think, is to innovate within that. So the concept centers around this, the interpretation of data, which is emerging through quite a cleverly placed little square window, which acts as a little portal of discovery, and it's all done in this custom typography, which I think is really distinct and really well crafted. As I said, I think it innovates in quite an uncharismatic sector, and I think it manages to just avoid those tech cliches. Ultimately, I think the company, from what I can understand of it, from what I can remember from the judging, was that it was a merger of different organizations that came together. And I think that already that presents quite a challenge for the design team to how to respond to that, how to take the merger and all of the staff together to create a new future together. And I think this is one of those projects that's really as much about uniting people, I think, internally, and setting a new course into the future together. And I think that's the ideal outcome of any merger, and doing a design that I think innovates within and gets people excited, I think is a really nice outcome. But I think in terms of the landscape, I remember when I was doing the judging, I was looking at what exists in this space. And I think there's probably 2 or 3 that are kind of key players: Equinox, Digital Reality. I think there's one called Coresight as well. And, they're fine, but they don't innovate. And I think the way that Centre Square has done that, I think is really engaging. As I said, I really like the window device. I think it's quite clever because it invites, but it also emits. So it's a 2-way process, which I think is quite nice. And obviously the way that they've played with it to introduce these surprising graphics, I think is striking. It's bold. It's distinct. I think the custom typography will help them build recognition as well. But yeah, I think it's simple but conceptually consistent. And I think one of the things I noted when I was thinking about what makes a really standout award entry from a branding point of view is that conceptual consistency. And actually, it's fine to have things that are really exciting on a top level campaign level. But actually, some of the things I really liked about this were just the little business cards and the little name tags where they use the square device quite cleverly. So really consistent use of the concept that really stuck with me. And I think that's probably why the judges on the whole voted it best of show.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. So I'd love to talk a bit more about what makes these projects stand out from the rest. So what are the key ingredients that make a branding scheme successful? I already mentioned a few of those, Tommy. So consistency is key.
Yeah.
Anything else?
Yeah, I mean, there's quite a few things, I think. And it was quite a nice opportunity to have a little think about this as well. I think when you're doing a judging, you're seeing all the work and you're inspired, but you're also thinking about how you present your own work, how you interpret your own work. And I think for me, ultimately, I mean, I think it's more than the aesthetics. I think that's the obvious thing for me. Without getting too feely about it, it's about communicating something that people can feel and that they can remember. And I always think if judges can't feel the concept, then they won't fight for it, and they certainly won't remember it. And I think for me, tapping into that emotional resonance is something that's quite key. And I think that's prevalent through many of the works that we've seen. But I think creating something, for me anyway, creating something that you can feel first and the logic comes second, I think both are quite essential. But if people, as I say, if people can't feel it, then they won't remember it. And ultimately, remembering it and giving judges a reason to fight for it, I think is ultimately what this is, where things can shine. And I think they have to tap into feelings that really connect with people. And I think it's different for every project. It could be joy, it could be rebellion. And I think you see a lot of these things throughout the entries that have won: escapism, pride, belonging. There can be quite a lot of things that people tap into, but ultimately they are about feelings and getting something that really resonates with people on that emotional level. And I think there's endless examples of that for me that run throughout the winners. And yeah, maybe I'll put it to Kat as well. I've got lots of other thoughts, but rather than keep on talking.
Oh no, I completely agree, Tommy. I have lots of thoughts too, and I actually almost have I have some points, I have a bit of a checklist that sometimes I use when I'm assessing stuff because it really helps. But I completely agree. And one of the reasons why I love the RGA work was that it hit a lot of these, these points that I look at. So I always think that starting with the truth is really important, so not a trend. And I think that was so prevalent in the We the Warriors work. So the best brands, I believe, always aren't really just all about aesthetics. Of course, they have to look pretty, but they're built on an insight or a feeling, just like you said, Tommy, as well. So I suppose if the strategic truth isn't sharp, then the brand will never cut through, and you can really spot that a mile off. So I think that gold winning work always has a point of view, whereas I suppose bronze work just shows a lovely color palette or something, but that's the leap. I think nailing the narrative before you touch the design is really important. So we always talk about narrative a lot in our work. It's so important, and a story drives everything: tone, typography, motion, behavior. So really tight narrative really holds the system together, and especially if that's a really flexible system that has to, has many touch points as well, that has to be really, really succinct. I think assets as well are very important. So I think you have to always use the work to create tension, and always be playing around with that tension and that friction that we always look for. So strong brands, I think, have opposites that fight a little bit, and that's a good thing. That friction is good. So that tension creates energy, creates memorability. So I think, silver work gets an idea across, and that's great. But I think gold work really amplifies that friction or that tension of that idea. Having a core symbol, I think, is really important. I talked about the crown in the previous work, and I think that it's very difficult to do, of course, but having one unmistakable gesture, so, the crown or a shape that's repeated everywhere, I think is really important. And again, it's very difficult to do, but maybe bronze work shows lots of different things, but gold work shows one thing really deeply and really profoundly, I believe. And I think we're always laddering up to the system. So a design system that lives and breathes and is flexible, but also, has to look really good as well. But it's, how does it work in motion and social? Is it, in the sort of messy real world that is prevalent? So yeah, a few other points. Craft is always really important, but it's always the idea that sings as well. So kerning, of course, grids, type detailing, all that stuff's really important, and they matter, but they aren't the idea. So craft elevates the idea, but it can't compensate for it, I believe. So yeah, and what are my other things? Bravery, I think, comes in there quite a lot, making brave choices and committing to them, and you can also see that. So I believe, strong surprise can beat symmetry, and bravery can beat pretty much everything, really. So brands are remembered for, I suppose, the things that they've risked and the risks they've taken, not just the things I believe that they've perfected. And I suppose coming back finally to We the Warriors, just embracing some cultural context, I think, and relevance is really important. It makes successful entries say, we understand the moment, we get it, we acted with intention, this is why we did this work. And that's timeless, really. So yeah, and I think ultimately, like Tommy said, we need to make work that has feeling and ultimate ultimately it's something that moved something. So emotion really in branding is non-negotiable. Where is the joy? Where is the rage? Where is the curiosity? Where is the intrigue? And so a brand without that emotion is just packaging, and it's just decoration. So I think gold work which shifts hearts and shifts minds, and that's the difference. And I think silver work maybe shifts thinking. So gold, I suppose, shifts your heart, and I really found that with the RGA work. The silver work shifted how I thought about something, and that was great. And then the bronze work was beautiful as well, but didn't quite necessarily have that leap that I was looking for.
Mm. It's interesting as well, isn't it, that when, I don't know if you found this, Kat, but that when you're looking through the judges and you're sharing comments, it's interesting how varied and what people take from the work and what they see in it. I found the discussion around the work really interesting, because people have different different drivers on probably all the things that we've mentioned. So I thought like just discussion is just so healthy. I think it opens your own mind about how you contextualize your own work and other people's.
Yeah.
But just building on some of those points as well, I think I like what you said about that sort of sense of intent and purpose. And I think for me, award-winning brand design does take a stance. You know, it has a sharp point of view. I think in some of the instances you'll see in this year's winners, I think some of them are serious, some of them are playful, irreverent or challenging. But they are sort of, the best ones are guided by an emotional driver, like a cultural context, identity aspirations, or even those unspoken frustrations. And I think one of my favorite projects actually of the last 5 years is the Tada Abandoned Nights as well. And I think that's a really good example of something that isn't surface level thinking, that's playing to those unspoken frustrations. It has intent. And I think neutral branding just doesn't win awards. I think distinct branding really does. I also echo the point that you made around craft. I think execution with craft and care, and I think it's a bit like cooking. I always think whenever you eat really beautiful food, whether it's made at home or by somebody or whether it's going out, I think what you really taste, you can taste the love that I think is made from when something's put together. And I feel the same thing about design. I think you can tell when you're judging something, when you're looking at something, the love and attention and the detail that's poured into that. And I think that's quite an infectious feeling. And I certainly always note that. And I think for that reason, like things have to be crafted with care. You know, it's not about the money that job got paid, or it's not about any other agenda. Like you can feel, I think it's tangible, the effort and the craft that's gone into a lot of these projects. And it's excellent at every turn. It's not just having a nice mark and then rubber stamping on everything. There has to be a momentum that's building, all from the core idea for me, from the hero right down to those sort of granular elements of the design, as I mentioned earlier. I also think authentic is quite key for me. I think judges sniff out the bogus. I think the things that are trend chasing are the things that are purpose washing. You know, I think, or over referenced, you know, I've seen a lot of those projects where I've probably seen reference that's very similar to that and has been used quite a lot. And I think what we saw, I think in the suite of work that's been produced this year, I think challenges all of those things in a really interesting way, and comes across that, bridges across that authentic path. I also think about like cultural relevance as well, and I think the project that We Are Warriors is the real footnote for me for ones like this. But I think award-winning branding speaks to what's happening now. It's not about the past. It's not about anything other than that. I think social tensions, technological shifts, behavioural changes, subcultures or movements. I think the best work really represents what's going on right now. And I think We Are Warriors is a perfect example of how creativity can elevate stories like that, and present the meaning now to the world.
That's great. Thank you so much. So Kat already mentioned the difference between, for her, what makes a gold or a silver or a bronze. I wondered if, Tommy, you had any thoughts, what makes for you the difference between those? Because I know that part of the discussion can often be quite difficult, can't it? Deciding
I
goes
think
where.
That's interesting, because I felt that one of the biggest takeaways for me was what people thought was, I think we were all agreed that something should is award worthy, but everyone seemed to be at a different place. And I think that's the interesting debate on it. There was a few that were unanimous, like We Are Warriors, as I remember. And I think it's a graphic equalizer of all of those things. For me, it would probably be the things that drive emotion or have cultural context, that take them beyond into those things that you really remember and really feel. There was projects that, when I was allowed to, I was explaining to people over the phone that I hadn't seen before. I was new to it, and those things came top of mind to me. I could recount them even though they weren't in front of me. So I think those are the ones that naturally lean themselves towards the gold, towards the gold or the higher awards. But yeah, I think it's a graphic equalizer it's different for everyone. I think it's a really difficult thing to say there's one specific thing that makes something a gold or a bronze or a silver. And I think sometimes it depends on the year it's entered.
Yeah, I agree. I actually do agree with that as well, very much so. And I think you can't, I mean, it would be lovely to, I do have a bit of a checklist in my mind that I always try and use, but you never really know what you're going to get. And that's, I suppose that's part of what's great about seeing new work all the time, because you never know what's gold worthy. But I would argue that it's never, if you can articulate the idea in under 10 words, that would be great. Even with Centre Square, it's such a simple mark, and it makes sense. You can see, so it's very conceptually really simple, but really complex as well. But I think that it's also being able to see whether that brand is distinctive enough that only that organisation could own it as well, and that feels really ownable and distinct, and having that. I think I spoke about this earlier, but having that combination of consistency and bravery is something that also separates gold from the rest. So I don't think you could never one without the other, actually. And like Tommy said, craft as well, elevating the message, that really helps, and it doesn't distract from the message, actually amplifies it. Having that cultural or human relevance too feels really fresh. But I agree, I definitely had my opinion swayed by other judges and what they believed, and I think it's important to have strong opinions loosely held as well when it comes to like looking at good work and judging gold standard work. But most of them always have these distinctive elements to them, I think. Yeah.
And sometimes the discussion around it, I think, can reveal things you hadn't noticed.
Yes.
And you appreciate it more
100%.
once you've had a certain thing. Even if you've read it, it's been explained or contextualized in a slightly different way following that debate. Yeah. So it's really interesting how it shifts, I think.
And now we're going to move on to our category game, which is based on the craft categories of the Brand Impact Awards. So the categories are typography, illustration, sonic, brand strategy, motion, and copywriting. Tommy, do you want to pick a category?
Yeah, okay. How about typography?
Sure. What's the value in using custom type for a project? Is it always appropriate?
I think it is always appropriate. I think for me, it's probably the most reductive element of any brand. If you can distill a brand down to just a typeface, and we're not even necessarily talking about the logo, if it is custom typography that represents part of the wider brand, I think it is the most reductive element. And I think if you can convey something of the story of the wider brand, even in its most reductive, simplest form, like a short sentence in a typeface, I think then you've got something incredibly powerful that you otherwise wouldn't have. So for me, it's essential, and I think it's really important. Certainly from a logo point of view, I think it's interesting that I've actually, when I was freelancing many years ago, I remember working at more than one studio actually that designed everything in one typeface, and I could never understand it. It was almost like, why would an airline? I'd love
to know what typeface that was.
Well, you could probably imagine. Guess what it is. You could probably imagine which one. You can probably guess which one it is. But why would an airline speak in the same visual aesthetic as a coffee shop? It just doesn't make any sense. So acknowledging that acknowledges how much a custom typography can bring to the story and bring to the aesthetic that you're trying to convey in every other way through the branding. So I think it's really important. And I think there's some brilliant examples of it this year. Obviously, Centre Square, Mozilla. Even when you think about like established brands like EE, you've seen one word written by EE, and you get that recognition straight away, don't you?
Kat, would you like to pick a category?
I'd love to. Can I be controversial and pick typography too? Because it's something that is very, we use it. It's a really big part of the work that we do. It's something I care very deeply about. And I think I would, to build on what you said, Tommy, I think custom type is a real power move. It basically tells the world, like, this brand hasn't settled for off the shelf. And it really gives a brand a tone that can't be stolen, and a rhythm that's completely their own, and a rhythm that can't be copied as well. Like, you can really, it just gives a brand that ownership. And I love custom type, I think, because you can get personality baked into every letter form, and you can really, we did some custom type for Chester Zoo, and it was such an enjoyable experience because you could just really get into it. But I don't always think it's the right call, because coming back to what I was saying before about ideas, and if the idea isn't strong, then custom type can just become decoration, and very expensive decoration at that as well. I always try and say that, we shouldn't really commission a typeface to solve a strategy problem. We should use it, I suppose, to amplify the truth that we already knew, and the story that we've already got. So when the story's sharp, custom type can be the hero. And when it's fuzzy, it can probably just become frosting, for want of a better word. I think it was great to see some good type work, like Tommy said, in this year's awards as well.
Great. Kat, do you want to pick a different category?
Yes,
so we've got illustration, sonic, brand strategy, motion, and copywriting.
I will go for copywriting. I used to be a journalist, so that's, again, another thing that's very close to my heart.
The question is, how important is tone of voice to a branding product?
Very important. Crucial, I would say. It's the difference between a brand that really speaks and a brand that has just messaging, I think. And we're always saying how the verbal identity is just as important in a brand as the visual identity. In fact, you should see them as just as a person. You speak a certain way, you are articulate in a certain way, you look a certain way. It's the whole package. So, I believe that design does give you a presence, but it's the voice that gives the personality, and that, without tone, you're just pretty pictures with nothing to say. And, everyone wants to hear what you say. So I think the best brands really have a very unmistakable voice. That's, they're the ones that you can hear in your head before you've even read the line. And that's when you know that tone is really working, and you get a sense of how they actually speak. But sadly, mostly brands really undercook the writing, I'd say. And there's a lot more over indexing on color systems and type, which I obviously, believe is great too, but the copy is whispered quite often. And I think the great brands do the opposite, and they let the words actually really punch and play and provoke and actually, bring that personality. So language is incredibly powerful, and the brands that recognize that are the ones doing the best work, I think, or conveying themselves proper. So tone of voice shouldn't really be a layer at the end. I believe it shouldn't be decoration or frosting. Like I said before, it's basically the narrative spine, and it helps to tell the story better. It's that emotional engine where you can do lots of the heavy lifting that the visuals just necessarily can't. And I think it's a really great and fast and easy way to differentiate in a world that I'd argue is dying and drowning in a sea of sameness right now. So we always see that as a superpower. And if you can lock voice and visuals together, that's when a brand really sings.
Definitely.
And echoing that, I completely agree. I think that it's vital. It's part of the heartbeat, isn't it? And I think for me, it's probably best surmised that I think aesthetics of a brand can sometimes be quite subjective, but words are just so compelling that they cross generations and cut through. And so for me, it's vital also.
Great, thank you. Right, Tommy, do you want to pick another category? We've got illustration, sonic, brand strategy, or motion.
I might talk about sound, if I may.
Yeah, of course. So do identities need a sonic element these days?
I think that question, in answer to that question, I think it entirely depends on their exposure and what platforms that they need to reach people.
Okay.
But ultimately, I think it's a huge part of what we try and consider of the projects that we work on. I think it's another way to invite audience into storytelling through sound, and I don't think it should ever be something that is seen as a profligate bolt-on that isn't quite necessary. But for me, when it's mixed in with a more sensory approach, Alphabetical, we talk a lot about our sensory approach to branding and design, and that's really about connecting multiple senses, heightening that resonance of the creativity and the messages that you're trying to convey, and ultimately amplifying the memory that you're going to translate to people in part on those audiences. There's research that's been done that says there's brands that engage more than 3 senses create 65% stronger memory encoding. So the idea of being able to tie these senses together is something that we're finding incredibly exciting in the work that we're doing at Alphabetical. And I think sound is just such a huge part of that. I think there's some really good examples of it this year. I think the Saudi Airlines, I think, is a really beautiful example of that. There's also the Design Bridge and Partners, where the actual sound is inherent to the concept, and that the idea of the sound of the forest is largely indicative of the health of the forest. So I think there's lots of things, lots of great work out there that's tying these things together, but I don't think it should ever be seen as the extra bit that you put on if you can. I think it has to be really part of that sensory scape that you're trying to create on behalf of a brand, whether that's through the experiences or other ways of engaging online. But ultimately, I think it's an incredibly exciting and untapped element of branding.
Great, thank you. Kat, do you want to pick another category? We've got illustration, brand strategy, or motion.
Illustration. Let's go for that.
Lovely. How can illustration enhance a branding scheme?
Well, I think illustration, I think, always gets a bit of a bad rap. I think everyone's like, oh, illustration, it's just a little part of the system, but it really should. It isn't just decoration at all. It should be seen as a strategy, I believe, and when done well, it can obviously make brands look really beautiful, but it also can build worlds. It can carry meaning, it can carry feeling, and a bit like words as well, and the verbal ID. It can really help do lots of that heavy lifting that perhaps the graphic elements can't. So I think it's a really, really important part of any identity, and we quite often commission illustrators. Sometimes we use AI. Sometimes it depends on what we need for the work. But it's I think it definitely has an incredibly powerful element in its own right, and it should be seen as more than, I think it should be given more credit than it's given.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think it's an essential part of every brand palette. I think you need that extra canon of communication that you can kind of draw on, that only illustration can do sometimes. And I think it's a useful thing to have in every, an illustration style or series of styles that's tailored to a brand, I think can be so helpful when you're rolling stuff out. But I also think that illustration it can communicate things that photography can't. You can do things in illustration that you can't do in any other way. And I think that's something to really note and cherish, isn't it? You know, the ideas that wouldn't be achievable in photography, you can do in illustration. I think for that reason, it also gives you the freedom to be more expressive, more playful, more irreverent. And through all the illustrations you see, that the more that stuff's dialed up, it never seems to be, it always treads the right line when done well of not offending anyone. You know, it can still be quite crazy. And I think in a way that the way that in photography, you just wouldn't be able to do. And there's some good examples of it this year. I think even the JKR stuff for Yahoo is a good example, that the illustrated exclamation marks, that just wouldn't work if that was in photography. It just wouldn't engage. You just wouldn't connect. But I think it just adds so much in most of these instances. I think also Lloyd's, that Wolf Olins did this year, the photographic or filmic version of the horse has been used so much, and yet and it feels so familiar. Yet when you see the rebrand and the refresh that Wolf Olins have done, just that faithful homage, but an illustrated version of the horse that animates, it just breathes new life into that whole brand altogether, letting the colours breathe. And I do believe that illustration, I know that there was a lot of other stuff, great stuff that went into bolster that, but I think the way that illustrated horse comes to life really brings it all together. As I said, I think the Yahoos are another good example of that this year.
Thank you. Thanks for giving those great examples as well. So we've got 2 categories left. We've got brand strategy and motion. Would anybody like to take one of those?
Would you like to?
I'm going to be mean. Can I take brand strategy? I'll take that.
Yes. What's the most important element of strategy to pin down before you start a project?
The truth, I think. I know that sounds a bit woo-woo, but it's really important to establish what it is that you're unearthing before we start any strategic exercise. It's like, what is the truth that we're uncovering and discovering, and then how can we amplify that? So I think that's the first, is what makes something completely unique to this company that only they can own, and only they can be, for want of a better word, authentic about. And then I think that's it, and that's the difficulty, isn't it? It's working out what it is that's what that truth is, and then what tension there is within that truth about that company. And then finding a way to make that into just helping them tell that story that comes from that. So it's always really difficult, because sometimes you have multiple truths, sometimes you only have one, sometimes you have to, it's difficult to work out what it is. Companies different sizes have different needs as well. So, but that, I would say, would be my read. I don't know if you've got another thought about that, Tommy. I see you smiling.
I agree. It's always the truth, isn't it? But I think sometimes the truth can be ubiquitous, like depending on who you're working with. And I think that it's also worth noting, I think, that it's what tension in the world that truth resolves, I think, is also really vital to try to get under the skin of, because ultimately that is the future of the organizations. And that's where you're looking towards, not just this is what we do and we're unabashed by it. It's and we're unapologetic for it. It's really why your existence is vital.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. So, Tommy, the last question: is using motion always a good idea in a scheme?
I think it is a good idea. Frequently, I think there's obviously times when it comes down to accessibility and location where movement isn't always appropriate, or is sometimes not used in the best way, or it's too frenetic, or it's too distracting. But ultimately, it's a chance to bring something to life, isn't it? It's something that most designers just really enjoy. It's okay, now we've got the concept, we've got the truth, and this is where we're taking it. We've got the aesthetic, and then just bringing it to life through motion, I think is an incredible way to open the door to the next chapter of that story and see, what it can do, where it can go. So I think as long as it's used in a meaningful way and it aligns with its audience and it offers an opportunity to tell more of the story of the brand, then I think it's a no-brainer. It's a really exciting thing. And I think the danger of it, I think sometimes is, it has to be in the right order, I find, because we've sometimes experimented with coming up with conceptual directions that begin with animation. And that's always a much harder process to then rationalize it back to what it does when it doesn't, when it isn't moving. but both are essential and both are exciting, aren't they?
Yeah, I agree. I think it almost feels a bit weird now if things don't move in static stuff, and I'm like, oh, we love motion as well in our studio. But coming back to that example, Tommy, of Lloyd's and the horse, I mean, that's a perfect example of how motion can really, and motion behaviour can really just amplify the story even more, and how that horse moved, and there's some lovely motion work actually in that project. So yes, I think when, we always try and pack it in wherever we can, but I agree where appropriate. But it is just another tool, and a really powerful tool for being able to, articulate something even better.
Yeah, I think also the Mo Museum of Modern Art's a really good example of a brand that it feels like it's waiting to animate, isn't it? You just look at that and that's going to be animating at some point. You can see what's going to happen. I think it's really exciting. It's almost the motion of that particular project is intrinsic to the identity, even when it's not moving. So that's when it's done really excellently, I think.
Yeah. Thank you. So we're going to sum up this section. How do you create award-winning branding? If you had to pick just one thing, what would you say? Kat, we'll start with you.
One thing. Oh, this is so mean.
Yeah.
How would you create it? I would say try and work out what you want people to feel first and foremost, and then that should be always lead with feeling. And I'm just looking at some of the entries and what that won gold, and what is it that ultimately they all have. And I think it was just, like I was saying a little bit earlier, that ability to move hearts, and not just, changing thinking is great, but always trying to work out what is the core feeling that you want people to have when they encounter the brand and the project, and then using that as your foundation for then trying to communicate that feeling, visually communicate that feeling. Difficult. Tommy?
Okay, thank you. It's tricky, I know. Tommy, yes.
Well, I think I started with the same sentiment as well, and I think I'll probably end it on that. I think award-winning branding creates feeling first and logic second for me. I think both are essential, but if people can't feel it, then they won't fight for it and they won't remember it. And ultimately, being remembered is what we're trying to do.